The sport of boxing has delivered us some of the most iconic viewership experiences in the history of sports. Some examples being Muhammad Ali and Leon Spinks fight in February 1978, which pulled in 90 million viewers with a 46.7 household rating, nearly half of every television set in America tuning in on a single night. Mayweather and Pacquiao's 2015 fight generated $410 million in revenue and 4.6 million pay-per-view buys, remaining one of the highest grossing sporting events ever held. 2 years ago in 2024, Mike Tyson at 58 years old, nearly 2 decades away from the sport, stepped into the ring against Jake Paul, and the fight drew 65 million concurrent viewers and an average minute audience of 108 million, cementing it as the most streamed live sporting event in internet history. These numbers are staggering, but with a part of the sport that is rarely broadcasted is what exists behind these numbers, or more accurately, what doesn't. Because while every sport has built an infrastructure over time, boxing has never done so. Because of this, many individuals have found this opening attractive. But the question worth asking isn't just what past notorious promoters like Don King and Frankie Carbo did. The sport was always going to have these type of individuals due to its poor infrastructure. For this episode of Price of Moment, we'll be exploring the economics of boxing and how the absence of developing an infrastructure didn't just leave the sport unprotected, but made exploitation the business model. The business of boxing originated solely as a pure cash transaction. The first noted fight in the modern era took place in England in the year 1681. This was a bare knuckle match, which is a fight with no gloves or padding in their hands. The fight was organized by Christopher Monk, a high-ranked English nobleman, matching his butler against his butcher, with the butcher winning the match and prize. At the time, boxing was illegal, as it was very reflective of the gambling culture. Despite this, matches were still held illegally, primarily because of the loads of money involved and powerful backers, making it very difficult for authorities to crack down. Bare knuckle fights were the norm at the time until in 1867, the Marquis of Queensberry rules was established, which mandated padded gloves, time rounds, and 10-second count for knockdowns, transforming it into the sport we know today. Fast forward 40 to 50 years later, the man who many argue that transformed the sport into a business was Tex Rickard. Tex organized his first promotion on September 3rd, 1906, where Joe Gans went against battling Nelson for a $30,000 purse in Nevada. In boxing, a purse is a fighter's guaranteed payment for showing up competing regardless of the win or loss. The word originates from the old tradition of literally putting prize money into a purse and handing it to the winner. Another term in the industry is a gate, which is the total ticket sales revenue from an event. For Tex Rickard's first fight, the Gans vs. Nelson Lightweight Championship in Nevada in 1906, he displayed the $30,000 purse in gold coins in the store window as a publicity stunt. From this first promotion, audiences were already being exposed to the marketing tactics that promoters would use to build excitement around a fight. His approach proved successful, and Rickard continued to grow his profile as a promoter. The 1921 fight between Dempsey and Carpentier in Jersey City became the first sporting event to produce $1 million in gate receipts, with total revenue of $1.7 million. He then followed that with Dempsey vs. Tunney rematch in September 1927 at Soldier Field in Chicago, which resulted in the gate of $2.6 million. Tex arguably set the precedent of the business of sport, as a commercial model is built around a promoter who controlled the matchmaking, the venue, the marketing, and gate receipts, giving them outsized influence over how the sport operated and grew over time. Fast forward to the 1930s, organized crime started walking into the sport. Mob hitman Frankie Carbone, known as the star of boxing, began controlling fighters, managers, and fights. In January 1949, Carbone and his business partner Frank Palermo and Chicago millionaire James Norris formed the International Boxing Club. Between 1953 to 1957, the IBC had a financial interest in 36 of 37 championship fights held in the USA. They controlled MSG, every major TV contract, and most of the top fighters in the nation. The structure laid out was option contract based. If a promoter controls the champion and you want a title shot, you have to sign away your next several fights to that promoter. Legendary trainer Cus D'Amato, who trained Mike Tyson, Floyd Patterson, Jose Torres, called it legalized extortion and was instrumental in working with the federal court to rule the IBC as an illegal monopoly. The case file was successful and the mob was officially gone, but the structure they exploited remained completely intact. As the sport grew, television gave more visibility options for viewers and economic opportunities for the sport, but these opportunities were not in the fighters' favor. Promoters became an entity of themselves, negotiating with TV networks, and after them and boxer managers took their cut, the fighters' remains were hardly anything. Also, with fighters having no union support, they were almost always alone in negotiations with no benchmark. In the 1960s, sanctioning bodies were then introduced with the World Boxing Association. This was the first certification body in the sport. When a boxer said he was the first world heavyweight champion, it was related to WBA, and the audience accepted that because there was no other body saying otherwise. This was until 1963 when a group of member nations broke away from the WBA over disagreements about politics and representation and formed the WBC, the World Boxing Council. Because of this, there were two organizations both claiming the authority to crown world champions. This now means two separate rankings, two separate champions, and also separate sets of fees charged to fighters and promoters for the privilege of competing for their respective titles. In 1983, the IBF, International Boxing Federation, was formed, and then the WBO, World Boxing Organization, in 1988. Each one arrived promising to be cleaner and fair than what came before. These bodies charged fees of about 3% of the fighter's purse to sanction a title. It sounds small, but with a fighter's purse of let's say $5 million, when you do the math, that's 150,000, but if they want to be recognized by all four, that equates to 600,000. It's a cost for the boxer, but then these titles carry legitimacy and marketing value to the athlete since it's a form of recognition for their respective discipline. But it's also another tactic for promoters to use it as strategic leverage depending on their model. An event-only promoter may lead a marketable fight to sell tickets and broadcast rights, so rankings help them build hype around the matchup. But a promoter tied to a boxer's long-term contract may have deeper motives and can use these rankings as leverage to force favorable negotiation terms and steer their champion toward beatable mandatory defenses to protect their fighter's ranking. And as mentioned earlier with promoters, the event only models the original concept of a promoter. Today, the dominant model is a contracted promoter with companies like Top Rank, Matchroom, and Don King Productions. Don King Productions was Don King, who many argue is the one who took this model to the most extreme form. He was known for signing boxers to long-term exclusive contracts that heavily favored him and often controlled both sides of a fight, having promotional ties to both the champion and the challenger, meaning he would profit regardless of the outcome. Any contender who wanted to fight a King promoted champion had to sign over their future promotional rights if they won. King shifted the model and promoters like him essentially absorbed the manager's role. Once promoters started offering fighters direct contracts with money up front, many fighters bypassed managers and worked with promoters who functioned as both. Legally, he was in control and boxing commissions couldn't stop it technically because both fighters had agreed. He built relationships directly with all sanctioning bodies. His start was Muhammad Ali against George Foreman in 1974, titled Rumble in the Jungle in Zaire, promising both fighters $5 million each. This was money he didn't have though, and he secured it through Mobutu Sese Seko, the dictator of Zaire, which is the Democratic Republic of Congo, to finance the fight, using the country's treasury to aim to boost the dictator's international profile. And all this goes back to infrastructure. There were state athletic commissions to regulate contracts and purse splits, but they were underfunded and inconsistent state to state. King understood them better than people enforcing them, and he used that gap systematically. He would stage fights and structure deals across different states, and also took it internationally if it suited him, like the Rumble and Jungle match. Congress eventually stepped in, passing the Muhammad Ali Boxing Reforms Act in 2000, which required promoters to disclose their earnings. This act prohibited them from simultaneously acting as a fighter's manager and giving fighters the legal right to see their own contracts. On paper, it looked like the intervention the sport had needed for decades, but in reality, it changed almost nothing. The act created rules but built no federal commission to enforce them. Fighters still had to personally fund a lawsuit against a promoter with decades of legal infrastructure behind them. Don King's power in the heavyweight division shifted in the 2000s as a new executive emerged, Al Heyman, who was a Harvard graduate and an acclaimed music manager working with artists like Whitney Houston, Janet Jackson, and Mary J., and began pivoting to the sport, signing fighters. His career-defining move was attaching himself to Floyd Mayweather and structuring television deals that would ultimately make Mayweather the highest paid athlete in sports. Al's clients were prosperous, as fighters under his advisory were earning more per fight than any generation before them, and Mayweather's purse were routinely reaching 9 figures. By that measure alone, he was delivering, but what drew criticism and what connects Heyman to the broader theme running through boxing's entire history was the structure behind those numbers. Through his premier boxing champions model launched in 2015, Heyman simultaneously advised somewhere near 200 fighters while negotiating directly with major television networks including CBS, NBC, Spike TV, and Showtime. That meant any network that wanted boxing content went through Heyman, and any fighter who wanted network exposure needed the Heyman as well. Competing promotional companies suddenly found they had no television access. Mike Tyson's own promotional venture, Iron Mike Productions, shut down entirely as ESPN, Showtime, and every major network called to say they're no longer doing business with them because Heyman had purchased all the available airtime. Lawsuits started coming in as Top Rank filed a $100 million antitrust lawsuit along with Golden Boy at $300 million. Both of these were eventually settled, dismissed, and Heyman kept operating, but boxing is now divided into two closed ecosystems with PBC on Fox and Showtime and Top Rank on ESPN, and there is no central authority and no mechanisms to force fighters from different camps to fight each other. What that meant in practice was that the best fights stopped getting made. If the number 1 and number 2 heavyweight in the world were in different ecosystems, there was no natural path to make that fight happen. Fans would spend years watching each side fight lesser opponents, while the obvious matchup sat unmade because the business structure made cooperation between the two sides financially irrational. An example being the late 2010s where Anthony Joshua and Deontay Wilder, who were simultaneously the two most dominant heavyweights. The fight never happened as Joshua was promoted by Eddie Hearn's Matchroom, working with DAZN and Sky Sports. Wilder was a PBC fighter working with Showtime and Fox. These are two different ecosystems, and every time negotiations came up, they fell apart. More and more boxers have become outspoken about the entire model. In 2023, Terrence Crawford, one of the best pound-for-pound fighters, sat down and explained exactly how the system still works. Early in his career, despite being a world champion, he was receiving 60 to 8% of gate and pay-per-view revenue. Promoters would receive a $10 million budget from a network and pay him $1.5 million while pocketing the rest, with Crawford having no idea what the actual deal was worth. Promotional contracts are a one-way street. The company could terminate a fighter anytime, but the fighter cannot terminate the promoter. Young fighters are deliberately kept dependent, with promoters managing their exposure to ensure they never outgrow the need for the promotional company.
Like I said, your promoter, he's getting all that.
Right, so I'm saying, if you're getting 6%, then there's somebody that's getting the 94%.
Yeah, I was getting 6% of the gate. I was getting 8 to 6% of the pay-per-view shares after it meet.
Sorry.
like a certain number that it never met.
Hits.
Yeah. So,
Put some crazy.
you know what I mean? Yeah. So that's what I mean by when I say boxing is kind of shady.
As you conclude, the sport of boxing will always produce greatness. The moments, the matches, the rivalries that will shock the world. But underneath all these iconic moments has been the same machinery that's been running on for over 100 years, and it hasn't built a true system to protect the individual actually taking the damage. And until it does, the biggest battle in boxing will always be fought outside the ring.